In the quiet hills of Yorkshire, England, lived a man named Thomas Miller. For 10 years, he had worked his small ranch alone, with only his faithful dog Buster for company. Thomas was 42 years old, with gentle brown eyes that had seen too much sadness. The morning sun painted the green fields with golden light as Thomas walked slowly toward the old wooden barn. His boots made soft sounds on the wet grass. Buster trotted beside him, his tail wagging gently. The dog was getting old now, with grey patches round his brown eyes. But he still followed Thomas everywhere. Thomas opened the barn door and breathed in the familiar smell of hay and animals. His 20 sheep looked up at him with sleepy eyes. He had named each one, though he never told anyone that. There was Daisy with her white spots, and Bruno, who always pushed to the front for food, and little Penny, who was the smallest but also the bravest. "Good morning, everyone," Thomas said quietly as he filled their water troughs. His voice sounded strange in the quiet barn. Some days, these were the only words he spoke out loud. 10 years ago, Thomas had lived a completely different life. He had been married to his beloved wife Rose, and they lived in a small flat in London. Rose had bright red hair and a laugh that could fill any room with joy. She worked as a nurse at the local hospital, and Thomas worked at a bank. They were saving money to buy a house in the countryside where they could start a family. But on a rainy Tuesday evening in March, everything changed forever. Rose was driving home from work when another car ran a red light. The accident was so terrible that Rose died instantly. Thomas was left alone with a pain so deep he thought it might kill him too. For months, Thomas could barely get out of bed. The flat felt empty without Rose's laughter. Her clothes still hung in the wardrobe. Her coffee cup still sat by the kitchen sink. Friends and family tried to help, but Thomas pushed everyone away. The pain was too much to bear. One day, Thomas made a decision that surprised everyone who knew him. He sold everything he owned in London and bought this small ranch in Yorkshire. It was far from the city, far from the memories, and far from people who might try to get close to him again. "If I don't love anyone, I can't lose anyone," Thomas told himself as he moved to the ranch. He built tall wooden fences round his property, and even taller walls round his heart. The people in the nearby village of Millbrook had tried many times to include him in their community. Mrs. Peterson from the bakery always smiled and waved when she saw him in town buying supplies. Mr. Johnson from the hardware store invited him to join the local farmers group. The vicar's wife, Mrs. Williams, asked him to come to church dinners and harvest festivals, but Thomas always politely said no. He would buy what he needed, say good day, and drive back to his ranch. The villagers eventually stopped trying, though they still worried about the sad man who lived alone on the hill. Thomas's daily routine never changed. He woke up at sunrise, made himself tea and toast, fed his animals, and worked on the ranch until sunset. In the evenings, he would sit by the fireplace with Buster sleeping at his feet. Sometimes he would read old books. Sometimes he would just stare into the flames and remember Rose. Love only brings heartbreak, he would tell Buster during their evening walks through the green fields. "It's better this way, boy, just you and me." Buster would look up at him with understanding eyes, as if he knew his master was still healing from something terrible. But on one dark October evening, during a terrible rainstorm, everything was about to change. The wind howled round the old farmhouse, and rain pounded against the windows like angry fists. Thomas sat reading by the fire while Buster dozed peacefully on his favorite rug. Suddenly, there was desperate knocking at his wooden door. The sound was so urgent and frightened that even Buster jumped up and started barking. Thomas looked at the clock. It was nearly 10 at night. Who could be out in this storm? The knocking came again. Louder this time. Thomas could hear the fear. In it, he walked slowly to the door, with Buster close behind him. When he opened it, he couldn't believe what he saw. A young woman stood there in a muddy white wedding dress, soaking wet and shaking with cold. Her long brown hair was plastered to her face, and her blue eyes were filled with fear and exhaustion. She looked like she had been running for hours. "Please," she whispered through chattering teeth. "Help me." Her voice was so weak Thomas could barely hear it over the storm. Then she collapsed right there on his doorstep. For a moment, Thomas just stared in shock. Then something inside him that had been frozen for 10 years suddenly came alive. His heart, which had been cold for so long, suddenly felt warm with concern. Without thinking, he quickly carried the woman inside, wrapped her in his warmest blankets, and made her hot tea by the fireplace as he watched her sleeping peacefully by the fire. With Buster lying protectively beside her, Thomas realized that his quiet, safe world was about to change forever. When the young woman woke up the next morning, she found herself lying on Thomas's old sofa, covered with soft quilts that smelled like lavender and sunshine. The storm had passed, and gentle morning light streamed through the cottage windows. Buster was sleeping peacefully beside her, his warm body pressed against her side, as if he was guarding her. Emma blinked slowly, trying to remember where she was. Her head felt heavy, and her body ached from running through the storm. Then she saw Thomas standing in the doorway, holding a wooden tray with steaming food. "Good morning," Thomas said quietly, setting the tray on the small table beside the sofa. "I made you some porridge and tea. You need to eat something." Emma struggled to sit up, wincing as her sore muscles protested. The wedding dress, now dry, but wrinkled and stained, rustled round her. She looked down at herself and felt embarrassed. "Thank you for helping me," she said softly, her voice still hoarse from the cold rain. "I'm so sorry for disturbing you last night." "My name is Emma Watson." Thomas nodded and pulled up a chair. "I'm Thomas Miller. This is my dog Buster." At the sound of his name, Buster opened one eye and wagged his tail before going back to sleep. Emma took a sip of the hot tea and felt warmth spread through her body. The porridge was simple but delicious, with honey and fresh cream. As she ate, she noticed Thomas watching her with concerned brown eyes. "Where did you come from?" Thomas asked gently. "Your car broke down." Emma's hands shook as she set down the teacup. The memories of yesterday came flooding back, and tears filled her eyes. She had been so focused on escaping that she hadn't really thought about what would happen next. "I'm from Manchester," she began slowly. "I was supposed to get married yesterday to a man named James Parker." She paused, taking a deep breath. "But I had to run away." Thomas waited patiently while Emma gathered her courage to tell her story. Something about his quiet, gentle manner made her feel safe enough to share her truth. Emma explained that she had been a primary school teacher in Manchester, working with children aged 6 and 7. She loved her job and was good at it. The children adored her, and she had been hoping to become the head teacher someday. "I met James at a coffee shop near my school," Emma continued. "He was handsome and successful. He owned several businesses, and always wore expensive suits. At first, he seemed perfect. He bought me flowers, took me to fancy restaurants, and told me I was beautiful. But as the months went by, Emma began to notice troubling things about James. He didn't like her spending time with her friends. He said her family wasn't educated enough for someone in his social circle. He criticized her clothes, her hair, even the way she spoke. He said he was just trying to help me become better," Emma said, wiping tears from her cheeks. "But it never felt like help. It felt like he was trying to change everything about me. The worst discovery came just 1 week before their wedding. Emma found text messages on James's phone from his previous girlfriend, a woman named Sarah Collins. The messages showed that James had treated Sarah exactly the same way. He had isolated her from her family, made her quit her job as a doctor, and controlled every aspect of her life. Sarah's messages said she felt like a prisoner in her own life, Emma whispered. She begged him to let her see her sister, but he refused. When she finally left him, he told everyone she was mentally unstable. Emma realized that James would do the same thing to her after they were married. He had already made a promise to quit teaching because he said wives shouldn't have jobs. He wanted her to sell her small flat and move into his big house, where she would have no independence at all. On our wedding day, I was standing in the church in my white dress, looking at all the guests. Emma said James was smiling at me, but his eyes looked cold. I suddenly understood that if I married him, I would lose everything that made me who I am. So Emma had made the bravest decision of her life. During the ceremony, just before the vicar asked if she would take James as her husband, she whispered, "I'm sorry, I can't do this," and ran out of the church. Everyone was shouting and calling after me. Emma remembered. James's face was so angry. I got in my car and just drove. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to get away. Emma had driven for hours through the countryside in her wedding dress, crying and shaking. When the storm started, her old car couldn't handle the bad weather. It broke down on a lonely road, and Emma had to walk in the rain until she found Thomas's ranch. "I know I'm just a stranger," Emma said, looking at Thomas with hopeful eyes. "But could I please stay here for just a few days? I have nowhere else to go. I promise I won't be any trouble." Thomas looked at this brave young woman who had risked everything to escape a bad situation. He thought about his own wife, Rose, who had always been independent and strong. Rose would have been proud of Emma for having the courage to choose her own path. Something inside Thomas's heart, which had been frozen for 10 years, began to melt just a little. "You can stay as long as you need," Thomas said quietly. Emma smiled for the first time since Thomas had met her, and even Buster seemed to wag his tail in approval. Over the next few weeks, something beautiful began to happen at the quiet ranch in Yorkshire. Emma and Thomas developed a special friendship that neither of them had expected. Each morning, they would work together feeding the animals and tending to the farm. Emma had a natural way of making even the hardest work feel enjoyable. Emma was a born teacher, and she gently encouraged Thomas to open up about his feelings. While they worked side by side repairing fences or collecting eggs from the chickens, she would ask him simple questions about his life before the ranch. "What was your favorite thing about living in London?" Emma asked one afternoon as they painted the old barn door. Thomas paused, his paintbrush dripping white paint. For 10 years, he had avoided thinking about anything good from his past. But Emma's gentle curiosity made him want to remember. "Rose and I used to walk along the Thames every Sunday morning," Thomas said slowly. "She would bring stale bread to feed the ducks. She always said the ducks looked forward to seeing us each week." Emma smiled. "That sounds lovely." Rose must have been very kind to animals. As the days passed, Thomas found himself sharing more memories. He told Emma about how Rose would sing while cooking dinner, how she collected old books from charity shops, and how she dreamed of having a garden full of sunflowers. Emma shared her own dreams too. She told Thomas about her plans to someday run her own school, where children could learn in a fun and creative way. She wanted to have a big library, art supplies in every classroom, and a vegetable garden where students could grow their own food. James always said that was a silly dream. Emma admitted one evening as they sat by the fireplace. He said, "I should focus on being a good wife instead of having big ideas. That's not silly at all." Thomas replied firmly, "Rose would have loved your ideas." She always believed people should follow their dreams. Emma looked at Thomas with warm eyes. "Rose sounds like she was a wonderful woman. I bet she wouldn't want you to be alone forever." Thomas had never thought about it that way. For 10 years, he had believed that loving someone again would somehow betray Rose's memory. But Emma helped him understand that Rose would want him to be happy. Slowly, Thomas began to share memories of his happy times with Rose, instead of just focusing on the sadness of losing her. He told Emma about their first date at a small Italian restaurant, their wedding day in Rose's parents' garden, and their dreams of buying a house in the countryside. Emma brought life back to the quiet ranch in ways Thomas had never imagined. She sang old folk songs while she worked, her voice carrying across the fields. She cooked delicious meals with vegetables from the small garden behind the house. She even convinced Thomas to buy some flower seeds and plant them near the front. "Porch, every home needs some color," Emma said as she planted bright marigolds and purple pansies. The biggest change came when Emma suggested they visit the village of Millbrook to buy supplies. Thomas had avoided the village for years, but Emma's gentle encouragement gave him courage. "I'll be right there with you," Emma promised. "We'll just buy what we need and come home." The local people were amazed to see Thomas with a friend. Mrs. Peterson from the bakery nearly dropped her tray of fresh bread when she saw them walking down the main street together. Mr. Johnson from the hardware store couldn't stop smiling as he helped them choose new tools for the farm. "It's so good to see you again, Thomas," everyone said, and Emma, "You're very welcome here." Mrs. Margaret Brown, the village school headmistress, was especially kind to Emma. She was a plump, cheerful woman with grey hair and twinkling blue eyes. When she learned that Emma was a teacher, her face lit up with excitement. "We could always use a good teacher here," Mrs. Brown said with a knowing smile. "Our little school only has 2 teachers for all the children. Would you be interested in visiting us sometime?" Emma's face glowed with happiness. For the first time since leaving Manchester, she felt like she might have a real future ahead of her. But their peaceful life was suddenly threatened 3 weeks later. Thomas was working in the barn when he heard car doors slamming in the yard. He looked out to see 3 men walking toward the house, a well-dressed man in an expensive suit, another man with a camera, and a police officer. The man in the suit was tall and handsome, but his eyes were cold and calculating. Thomas knew immediately that this must be James Parker. "Where is she?" James demanded when Thomas came out of the barn. "Where is Emma Watson? I'm her fiancé, and I'm here to take her home." Emma appeared in the doorway of the house, her face pale with terror. "I don't want to go with you, James," she said, her voice shaking. James smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. "Emma, darling, you are not thinking clearly. You ran away from our wedding like a crazy person. Everyone in Manchester is worried about you." The private investigator started taking pictures while James spoke loudly so anyone nearby could. "Here, she needs medical help, and as her fiancé, I'm responsible for her. She can't make good decisions when she's in this state." Emma was terrified. James had money and influence, and he was making her sound like she couldn't think for herself. The legal system seemed complicated and scary, and she didn't know how to fight someone with so much power. Thomas watched Emma's fear and felt something he hadn't felt in 10 years. The strong desire to protect someone he cared about. In that moment, he realized that Emma had become much more than a friend to him. She had become the person he wanted to spend his life with. "You don't have to face this alone," Thomas told Emma. taking her hand firmly. "We'll fight this together." Thomas found courage he didn't know he had. That evening, after James and his men had left with angry threats, Thomas sat with Emma by the fireplace. She was shaking with fear. But Thomas felt a fire burning inside him that had been cold for 10 years. "We need help," Thomas said firmly. "Tomorrow. I'm going to find us a good lawyer." The next morning, Thomas drove to the nearby city of Leeds, leaving Emma safely at the ranch with Buster standing guard. He had never hired a lawyer before, but he was determined to find someone honest who would fight for Emma's rights. Started the third law office he visited. Thomas met Mr. William Davies, a kind man with grey hair and gentle eyes. Mr. Davies listened carefully as Thomas explained Emma's situation. "This happens more often than people think," Mr. Davies said sadly. "Controlling partners use the legal system to force people back into bad relationships. But we can fight this. Miss Watson has rights, and will prove she's perfectly capable of making her own decisions." While Mr. Davies began preparing their case, the people of Millbrook rallied round Emma. Over the past few weeks, she had made friends throughout the village. Mrs. Peterson from the bakery brought fresh bread to the ranch every few days. Mr. Johnson from the hardware store had seen how hard Emma worked and how kind she was to everyone. "That young woman has done nothing but help people since she arrived," Mrs. Peterson told her neighbors. "If someone is trying to force her to go back to a bad situation, we need to help her." Mrs. Margaret Brown, the village school headmistress, was especially supportive. She had watched Emma work with the village children during story time at the library. Emma was a natural teacher who made learning fun and exciting. "I want to offer Emma a permanent teaching position at our school," Mrs. Brown told Thomas. "This will show the court that our community believes in her abilities and wants her to stay." Mr. Henry Clark, the village doctor, also stepped forward to help. He was a respected man who had been caring for the people of Millbrook for 30 years. He examined Emma carefully and spoke with her for over an hour. "Miss Watson is in perfect mental health," Dr. Clark wrote in his official letter. "She is intelligent, clear-thinking, and fully capable of making her own life decisions. Any claim otherwise is completely false." Word spread quickly through Millbrook about Emma's situation. People who had only met her briefly came forward with offers of support. The vicar's wife, Mrs. Williams, organized a collection to help with legal expenses. The local farmers offered to testify about Emma's good character and strong work ethic. "I've never seen the village come together like this," Thomas told Emma one evening. "Everyone can see what kind of person you really are." When the court hearing was scheduled for the following week, Mr. Davies felt confident about their case. He had gathered strong evidence and many witnesses. But his best discovery came when he investigated James Parker's past relationships. Davies found Lisa Thompson, James's former girlfriend who had been mentioned in those text messages Emma discovered. Lisa was now living in Scotland, working as a doctor again after rebuilding her life. "James destroyed my confidence and made me believe I was worthless," Lisa told Mr. Davies during a long phone call. "He isolated me from my family, made me quit my job, and controlled every aspect of my life. When I finally found the courage to leave him, he told everyone I was mentally unstable, just like he's doing to Emma now." Even more surprising, Mr. Davies found other women who had similar experiences with James. All of them agreed to testify about his pattern of controlling behavior. On the day of the court hearing, Thomas was amazed to see how many people from Millbrook had come to support Emma. The small courtroom was packed with villagers who wanted to show their belief in her. James arrived with his expensive lawyers and several men in business suits, trying to look important and powerful. But when he saw the crowd of ordinary people supporting Emma, His confident smile faded slightly. Mrs. Margaret Brown testified first, explaining how Emma had volunteered at the school and shown excellent teaching skills. Dr. Clark presented his medical report confirming Emma's mental health. One by one, the villagers spoke about Emma's kindness, intelligence, and strong character. "She helped me repair my fence after the storm," said Mr. Johnson. "She works harder than anyone I know. She reads stories to the children at the library every Saturday," added Mrs. Williams. "The children love her." Then it was Thomas's turn to speak. He stood up slowly, his heart pounding, and looked directly at Emma. Her blue eyes were filled with trust and hope. "Emma Watson is the strongest, bravest person I know," Thomas said, his voice growing stronger with each word. "She had the courage to leave a bad situation and build a new life for herself. She brought joy back into my world when I thought I would never be happy again. She doesn't need anyone to control her. She needs people who will support her dreams and help her become the person she wants to be." Emma also spoke for herself, standing up straight and speaking clearly. She explained why she had left James, how he had tried to control every aspect of her life, and how she wanted to live as an independent woman with the right to make her own choices. The evidence against James grew stronger when Lisa Thompson and the other women testified about their experiences. The pattern was clear. James sought out strong, independent women and then systematically destroyed their confidence and freedom. The judge listened carefully to everyone over two long days. Finally, he was ready to make his decision. "Miss Watson," the judge said, looking directly at Emma, "you are clearly a capable, intelligent woman who has the right to choose her own path in life. Mr. Parker's claim that you are mentally unstable has no merit whatsoever. You are completely free to live wherever and however you choose." Emma cried tears of joy, and Thomas felt prouder than he had ever felt in his life. The people of Millbrook cheered, and even the court officers smiled at the happy ending. 1 year later, on a beautiful spring morning in May, Emma Watson was getting ready to become Emma Miller. She stood in the small bedroom of Thomas's farmhouse, looking at herself in the old mirror. This time, she wore a simple cream-colored dress that Mrs. Peterson from the bakery had helped her choose. It was nothing like the fancy wedding dress from her first attempt at marriage, and that made her happy. "You look beautiful, dear," said her mother, Mary Watson, as she helped Emma with her hair. Emma's parents had driven up from Manchester the day before, along with her younger brother David and her best friend from school. Jenny dotted first. Emma's family had been worried when she told them about Thomas. They remembered how controlling James had been, and they were afraid Emma might be rushing into another relationship. But when they met Thomas, all their worries disappeared. "He looks at you like you're the most precious thing in the world," Emma's mother had whispered the night before, "and more importantly, he listens to everything you say. That's real love, Emma." Outside, the ranch looked like something from a fairy tale. Thomas and the men from Millbrook had spent weeks preparing for the wedding. They had built a woodman arch covered with wild flowers from the Yorkshire hills, long tables made from old barn wood were set up in the green field behind the house, decorated with mason jars filled with daisies and buttercups. The entire village of Millbrook had come to celebrate. Mrs. Margaret Brown, now Emma's boss at the village school, had organized the women to prepare a feast. There were fresh-baked pies, homemade bread, roasted chicken from local farms, and vegetables from everyone's gardens. Thomas stood under the flower arch, wearing his best suit and a nervous smile. Buster sat beside him, wearing a blue ribbon round his neck that the village children had made specially for the occasion. The old dog seemed to understand that this was an important day. Mr. William Davies, the lawyer who had helped them win their court case, had offered to perform the ceremony. In England, solicitors could officiate weddings, and Emma and Thomas couldn't think of anyone more fitting to marry them than the man who had fought for their right to be together. As Emma walked across the field toward Thomas, holding her father's arm, she thought about how much her life had changed. A year ago, she had been running through a storm in a torn wedding dress, scared and alone. Now she was surrounded by people who truly cared about her. Walking toward a man who loved her exactly as she was, Emma had started teaching at the village school 6 months ago, and she loved every minute of it. The children adored her creative lessons and kind nature. She had started a reading club that met every Saturday morning, and she was already planning to expand the school's programs. Mrs. Brown had even promised that Emma could start a small garden behind the school where the children could learn about growing vegetables. Thomas had changed just as much as Emma. He regularly attended village events now, and had even joined the local farming cooperative. The other farmers were amazed at how much happier and more confident Thomas had become. He smiled more, talked more, and seemed to have found joy in life again. "I never thought I could love again," Thomas said to Emma as they stood holding hands under the flower arch after Rose died. "I thought my heart was broken forever, but you didn't just bring love back into my life. You taught me that love grows stronger when you share it with others." Emma's eyes filled with happy tears as she looked round at all their friends and neighbors celebrating with them. "You saved my life that stormy night when I showed up at your door," she said. "But you did more than that. You showed me what real love looks like. It's not about control or possession. It's about supporting each other's dreams and growing together." When Mr. Davies pronounced them husband and wife, the whole crowd cheered. Buster barked excitedly and wagged his tail as if he knew something wonderful had just happened. As the sun began to set over the Yorkshire hills, casting golden light across the celebration, Thomas and Emma danced their first dance as husband and wife. Mrs. Williams played her accordion while the village children clapped and sang along. The children had made a special banner that they hung between 2 oak trees in bright colored letters. It read, "Love wins when you have courage." Emma's friend Jenny caught the bouquet of wildflowers, and everyone laughed when shy Mr. Johnson from the hardware store asked her to dance. Mrs. Peterson served her famous strawberry cake while Dr. Clark told funny stories about delivering babies. In the village, as the evening grew darker and the first stars appeared in the clear sky, Thomas and Emma sat together on the front porch of their farmhouse. Buster was curled up at their feet, tired but content after all the excitement. "Look how far we've both come," Emma said softly, watching their friends and family still celebrating in the field. Thomas and Emma's story had become an inspiration to everyone in Millbrook. It showed that it's never too late to open your heart again, that real love supports rather than controls, and that sometimes the most beautiful beginnings come from the most difficult endings. Their ranch was no longer a place of loneliness and sadness. It had become a home filled with love, laughter, and hope for the future. And every morning when Thomas and Emma woke up together, they knew that they had found something truly special. Not just love, but the courage to build a life based on respect, kindness, and shared dreams. The end.